And we are live.
Yes, we are.
All right. Cool. Hey guys, how are you?
And now we've got a bloody echo.
Where'd that come from?
We haven't had that for the last 30 minutes, and now all of a sudden we go live and we've got one.
Fuck. Technology, hey?
Who's got the echo? You got the echo.
It's all good.
I'll go mute.
No, we need you. You're the fucking guest of honor.
Yeah.
I reckon that it might just be the mute. Anyway, is the echo still there?
No, it's all good.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're all good? We're all good to go?
We'll get through. It's fine. We've dealt with much worse.
Yeah, it's a fine oiled machine like always, isn't it?
And it's normally Crafty's fault.
It's usually Crafty's fault.
I'm just a passenger. All right, so welcome to Aussie Craft Distillers Shooting the Shit. And we're not just Aussie Craft Distillers Shooting the Shit. We sometimes do other things, and we talk to people overseas and see what's happening overseas. So tonight, we've got a special guest, Greg Ramsay from the New Zealand Whisky Collection. I got that right, Greg?
That's it, Crafty.
All right, that's good. It's good to know. Yes,
NewZealandWhisky.com for those playing at home.
Yes, so it's a bit of a giveaway, but we're going to be talking about New Zealand whiskey. A little bit different, but Greg's got a long history in whiskey, relatively speaking, and in Australia and New Zealand. So we'll be covering off on that. But first things first, g'day to Greg, g'day to Luke, g'day to Todd. How are you all, lads?
Very good. Staying dry, seeing as the rain's back.
Everything's dry, but not dry in the glass. What are you all got in your glass tonight? What are you going to be drinking?
Well, Lukey.
I'm actually going with a couple little samples that I picked up from. I don't know whether anyone's heard of Horny Pony.
Mm-mm.
No.
Nope.
So Horny Pony sounds obscene, but he's got just a whiskey collector who decided to start selling off his collection in small samples. So he's got some amazing stuff. And what I'm drinking tonight, I've got the Hobart Whiskey Winterfest 2022.
Wow, yeah.
And then I've got, in honor of our last guest that couldn't make it, I've got the Highwayman Batch 3 Fires to Floods that I'll move on to as well.
Wow, special release.
Horny Pony, you can get samples of all sorts of interesting shit. It's actually quite amazing.
Very nice. Something a little bit different there, isn't it?
So,
okay. And what about you, Todd? What are you drinking?
Okay, so I'm going to go the Gospel Solera cask rye. So this is part of my hoard from our recent trip to Whiskey Life.
I was going to say, I thought that's where you might have got it from. Yeah.
I bought 2 bottles. The first one's gone, sadly. but this is good.
It was only last week, wasn't it?
Last week? 2 weeks ago.
2 or 3 weeks ago now, I'm sure.
Ago. Yeah.
Right.
It's been enough time.
I'd like to blame Kathy, but she's been in New Zealand for 2 weeks, so maybe it was me.
Yes. All right. Well, I'm on the. Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay.
The Dugon, which is Barongarup Distilling Co., which is part of the Great Southern Distilling Company, which is Cameron Symes, and his distilleries over in WA. So that's 40%, very easy, very approachable. So I thought I'd start with that. And WA, and then I thought I'd move on to one I'm very partial to, is King Lake.
King Lake. I killed mine. I need to get another bottle.
Yeah, you won't go wrong. So 46%. So this is their which one is this? This is their O'Grady.
That's
O'Grady
Stand. Yeah.
Stand, yeah,
absolute
which is
cracker.
their signature release, I guess. And so that's what I'm going to be having a few of. And Greg, what do you got, mate? What are you having?
Got a little progress report, a little 9-month-old, which I get sent from time to time. This is an ex-bourbon from a 55-litre Journeyman distillery cask just outside Chicago.
Nice.
That's been brought back to 45%. And then I'm going to hook in Moravian Revolution, which is a brand that's only available in New Zealand at the moment, but we'll be looking to bring that a bit broader afield pretty soon.
Okay, and what's the Revolution about? What's the cask in that one?
So our Omaruvian was a whiskey that when we sort of first got into whiskey, I always saw cask strengths as a pretty small end of the market and not really worth spending a whole heap of time, developing the routes to market and the following. But we had a French whiskey blogger who loved our Dunedin double cask, and he just wanted it high proof, and he wanted to take from the cask, and he said I want it to be really, really jammy. And anyway, so we found a really sort of almost a rancid barrel of this our New Zealand whiskey, which had been in a red wine barrel for over 13 years, and it was really very, very tannic, sticky and jammy. And anyway, we bottled it and sent it over through our European distributor, and it sold over there really well. And he did a glowing review of it, and Omaruvian sort of had a real cult following ever since. So it's almost at the offensive end of the sticky tannic spectrum. So that's the old Omaruvian, very aged. Sort of, we launched it as I think a 14-year-old. The oldest is 18 years old. But right. The Omaruvian Revolution is our new product that we've distilled ourselves and we've matured out. So it's just a revolution in the prospects and the future of the company.
Right. Okay. Well, that opens up really well, actually, to what I wanted to kick off with. And there's two parts to your empire, isn't there? There's the where you acquired barrel stock from a distillery that ceased activity, and then you've got you've built a distillery in New Zealand. Am I right on that? So there's the two sides of it, but it's all one business.
Yeah. So after working with Bill Lark and Lynn for several years, and then proposing and project managing the Nant distillery, which Crafty, you know probably more about than you wish you did, but we then did a distillery in Scotland and then one in Chicago, and out of that I just put a shingle up as a distilling development consultant, and literally within a few months of a website going up, we got some receivers or liquidators, accountants in Queenstown, New Zealand, who'd been appointed to take into receivership this big stock of whiskey, so 80,000 litres of cask strength, single malt and blended whiskey. And so I didn't know how to pick my way through 80,000 litres of whiskey and put a value on it, but Bill Lark will have a crack at anything. So I paid Bill to come over with me, and we charged them a fee, and we put a number on it, and then they came back about 3 months later and said they couldn't get any interest in anyone buying it at that number. So I went out and raised the money, and we bought that whiskey. So that was back in 2010. So yeah, that old stock of whiskey, we rebranded it, we revitalised the sales channels, we completely redid the packaging and so on, and also sort of the product segmentation in the inventory, and then and then we started distilling ourselves initially in partnership with our bottling company. We built a cute little still there in Christchurch, and now we've built our own dedicated larger scale distillery down in the Spates Brewery in Dunedin. And Spates is the number one selling beer in New Zealand, but it's actually not that well known outside New Zealand. For some reason, Lion, who owns Spates, keep buying craft breweries like Panhead and Emerson's, and they always develop those brands and export them to Australia. But Spates, I don't know if it's ever been actually available in Australia. Have you ever seen it over here, Crafty?
No, I haven't heard of it. And I like to think I know my craft beer, and I haven't heard of them. Yeah.
Well, it's
one of the memories,
isn't it? Really. Yeah. I mean, back in the day, you drank Lion, or DB or
Mine
if you're
red.
lucky, get your hands on States, you're doing really well.
That was
it's in Dan's.
I was delving into craft beer, wasn't it, back then?
It was
It was
Monteith's was the other one, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And that's
the other craft.
And they brought that over here, but for whatever reason, Spates hasn't been brought over here. But it's a beautiful big brewery down in downtown Dunedin. Really gorgeous 1870s series of sort of colonial structures, and our distillery itself is up in the highest point of that distillery, up in the mill house, which is this lovely big arched building at the very highest point of what's about a 7-story complex of mill houses and bottling halls and brewery buildings. So yeah, but it's a lovely part of New Zealand, Dunedin. It's sort of not necessarily on the touring route like Queenstown is or Auckland, but it's a very reminiscent city of Hobart. Very similar history, very similar harbour, very similar mountains. It's a really beautiful town of about 120,000 people with a really big university and a big university culture. Part of it's sort of the fabric of the community there is the university.
And it was
a good smattering of Scottish people too. The Scottish history.
That's right.
There,
it was based on the street map of Edinburgh. Hence
Yeah.
the reason why we had street ending in stairs.
And the old name of Edinburgh was Dunedin, and that's why they adopted that name.
Huh.
Wow.
There you go. So
go back further, Greg. Go back early 2010, earlier than that. How did you get into it all? What was your background that got you into this? I mean, you mentioned Bill and Lynn Lark, and you knew them and that. So, and you mentioned Nant. Pre that, what were you doing? Where did you come from?
I grew up in Bothwell, which is my hometown. My family's got a big old farm, and I was always interested in the history of the area, and I wanted to. The farm's best known for having Australia's oldest golf course on it, so I was interested in somehow turning that golf history into golf tourism and giving us a reason to restore all these old colonial buildings and barns and convict cottages and so on. So after school, I went off to Scotland and worked for a year as a caddy in St Andrews, just trying to learn about golf history and golf tourism. But at night times, I worked in the old Road Hole Bar in the Old Course Hotel, and that at that time had the world's largest single malt menu. And it was 1995 was a really important year in single malt because Diageo, which back then was called United Distillers and Vintners, they launched the classic malts range, which was really the first investment by a big multinational in selling and explaining the terroir of whiskey. And because our bar was one of their 4 big whiskey embassies, they invested a lot of money in our sort of specialist whiskey staff, which I'd somehow conned my way into being class barman. So, they invested a lot. And every other week, Diageo hosted us either at one of their distilleries or one of their blenders, or distillers would come into our distillery and do workshops and tutorials for all of us just to really learn the stories and learn the production differentiation and techniques of all these different Diageo distilleries, which, even today, I dare say probably 60 or 70% of the distillery production capacity in Scotland is all owned by that one company. So it was a really formative year for me about learning about single malt whiskey.
That's astounding that one company can own so many distilleries within Scotland. It's astounding.
Yeah.
That they can have.
Well,
that
and the
power
other nice connection. Yeah, it's interesting because the connection also is the distillery that we bought in New Zealand. The whiskey that we bought was distilled by Seagram's, and Seagram's in Canada were actually the biggest shareholder in United Distillers and Vintners. And between Seagram's and Four Roses and all of their distilleries in Kentucky and Tennessee, Seagram's controlled, and they also had a 50% share in Japan with Kirin. So between those two companies, Seagram itself ultimately controlled about 80% of beverage distilled liquid at the time, not petroleum or distillates for the fuel industry, but literally they generated 80% of all worldwide beverage distillations. So it was amazing, amazing monopoly almost at the time. That's in the 70s and 80s, so quite a while ago now. But yeah, and the New Zealand distillery was their furthest, remotest from Canada, from their headquarters. The southernmost distillery in the world was their distillery in Dunedin.
And was that the infamous Wilson's whiskey? That was
it was Willowbank Distillery in Dunedin.
Willowbank, okay, yep.
Haven't heard of that one.
Yeah, and that's where all the Wilsons was made. Crafty. I mean, when you went through uni, Crafty, you were still drinking Wilsons then, weren't you?
Oh yeah. That turned me off.
That's
about
why
18. You know how our job is to get people back on the whiskey horse at a cellar door. They've had a bad experience in their youth. And you go, would you like whiskey? And they go, oh no, I had a bad experience. Well, I had a bad experience, and my bad experience was Wilson's whiskey, right? So I didn't touch whiskey until I was about 18. I was about 40 before I even tried whiskey again and get anywhere near my lips. And when you released it was the 21-year-old Wilson's whiskey under New Zealand Whisky Collection. That was how long ago was that, Greg? That was 6 months ago or something like that.
6 months, yeah. I think it's January. Yep.
So I had to get a bottle. And I had to see how I was going to react to it. Was I going to have flashbacks at knowing that it was Wilson's whiskey or not? The good news is I drank it and I still drink it. So I got over my Wilson's pain.
I hope you enjoyed it.
How you went with that?
Yeah, no, it was good. It was very, for want of a general description, it was very space-sidey. It was very fruity. It was very, very approachable. And it's one if someone comes into the shed and they want to try something to start with, it's a good one to start with. So it had a funny mash bill. So Wilson's was 70% malt barley spirit, so single malt spirit, and 30% straight barley grain spirit through a column still that hadn't been malted. It had just been mashed and enzymes added. So it was quite an interesting mash bill, and still today, like when that whiskey, as in the same spirit, like our Dunedin Doublewood, our aged Doublewood, is that same liquid. People don't know it's a single grain. One company in Ireland put it in an award as a single. They called it a single pot still blended grain spirit. So who knows what you want to call it, but they just didn't have a category for it because it was all barley. So it was not it didn't meet certain, but it was from a single distillery. And anyway, all those, you could call it lots of different things, I think. From a single distillery, and it's 100% barley. So yeah, it could fall under a category, couldn't it?
Does it not still fall under the single malt category then?
No, because only 70% of it was malted, and the other 30% was just crushed grain mashed in with enzymes to get the sugars out and get the fermentation going. So
yeah. Well, it's got to be 100% malted.
30%. Yeah, right. There you go. So just before we move on, I just wanted to do a quick little shout out. Happy birthday to our most regular viewer.
Yeah, his birthday. So way to go there.
And also Youngie, who hasn't actually said hi. I'm sure he's watching. He always does. Youngie as well. Doesn't look a day over 80.
He's going to love you saying that.
He's not here, so I can say what I like. Woo, there you go. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Yes. So how is the New Zealand collection going? How's business?
Yeah, we've had We've had a cracking year this year. Last year was after the very buoyant first year of COVID, when there's so much money washing around in the economy from all the government stimulus, things were great. And we were also distilling. Whereas last year, things tightened up. There wasn't as much, sort of COVID dragged on a lot longer. And most, our most affordable whiskey is $120 for a 500 ml. And all of our aged whiskey is sort of, $300 and up. So it's pretty super premium price point at the moment. We're looking forward to all the whiskey we started laying down last year, to be ready towards the end of next year. And then, we'll be able to go back to a 700 ml bottle and be in a sub $100 packaging price point, which, means we can be a bit more of a higher volume, more relevant brand. So but this year's been great because of all the whiskey shows. We've seen this just incredible response literally across Australia, where we've been doing the shows. We haven't done Western Australia yet, but we've done South Australia, Victoria, Sydney, and Brisbane. We've done pretty much 2 shows in every city now, and that's had a great response because the Australian market for us is sort of the low-hanging fruit. We've got a great relationship with Dan Murphy's, and expatriate Kiwis are very nationalistic in their spending, so we get great support. In the cities where there are high concentrations of Kiwis, particularly on the eastern seaboard, where it seems they have tighter knit frameworks and networks. So, and then Europe's been a really big market for us, particularly at those higher proof, rarer whiskies. They just don't seem to be anywhere near as price sensitive for that European market, and our distributors over there are fabulous. And Taiwan's a really good market. So they also, Taiwan just love high proof spirit, and they love really rich ruby coloured whiskies. So our all of our red wine, matured whiskies, red wine barrel matured whiskies, have a very good following there. So those 2 markets are really kicking on again as well. But so it's a good year for us, Crafty. We at the start of COVID, we had to get a bit more lean. We had to let some really great team members, move on to new things, but thankfully they did all find, great new opportunities as we sort of had to downsize a bit. Obviously, we had to close our cellar door, and we haven't reopened that, but we hope to have that reopened for this coming summer tourist season in Oamaru. Oamaru is a really poppy little tourist town, an hour up the coast from Dunedin, really beautiful old harbour from the 1870s, 1880s, very much like Salamanca in Hobart. So, we look forward to having our cellar door up and cranking away again this season. And that'll sort of complete our business operations to what it was pre-COVID.
Okay. And you're going across the ditch a fair bit, or do you sort of base yourself in Australia at Ratho Farm, and you've got a team over there that's doing the work as far as a management team?
Yeah, so Michael Byers I think he'd be a great guy for you all to interview. Michael was a New Zealand farm boy from Tapanui and West Otago, who was a winemaker, ended up in Germany making vintages, and then ended up marrying a Finnish girl and ended up in Finland. You can't go wine making there, so he ended up distilling, and he'd been distilling at the biggest distillery in Helsinki for many years, and during COVID, we sort of headhunted him out and relocated him and his whole family back from Finland to Oamaru. So Michael runs the whole distilling team, the production, the bottling, the maturation, and we'll be running the cellar door. And they also run the New Zealand domestic market. Right. And we, from our Hobart team here, we do all of our export and logistics and brand management and packaging for the rest of the world. So that's all run from here, and that's so it's always worked fairly well, because it's good to be in Tassie. It's such a dynamic, vibrant, tight knit community of very innovative, passionate distillers, and very supportive of one another. So I think we feed a lot off that, which is really good.
Yeah, it's interesting. So how did you find COVID lockdowns? And New Zealand's only just come out of complete lockdown now, hasn't it? So you're able to get back over.
Yeah.
How did you find that?
So it was a bit like Australia. In the first year, there was a lot more stimulus around. So online sales were great, and spending generally was good. But yeah, the second year of COVID, as in last year, was much harder because there wasn't the same stimulus around. It was dragging on a lot longer. And New Zealand, as you know, had a lot more sort of, a bit like Sydney and Melbourne in a lot of ways, they had a lot more sort of false dawns and reopenings and shutdowns again. And the hospitality sector really was decimated, a bit like Melbourne, at its worst. So that certainly hurt. And we had to just come up with a lot of new packages and innovations. And in some ways, we were a bit lucky that we became so focused on installing our distillery in Speight's that, that was enough and a big enough job with our newer, leaner, narrower team that it feels like it all worked out okay. Like we got through it, if you know what I mean. No one would want to go through it again, but at least we got through it. Yeah.
Certainly, I think we've all got our war stories of surviving COVID and how we've had to adapt and change. What do you think the biggest change for you will be now that sort of we're coming out of COVID from what you did 2 years ago?
Yeah, I think, David Vitale once said to me, Starwood was going great. And, I talked to David a lot, chatting to him again today, and Starwood was going really well, but he wonders where he might have got that brand to if he'd never had to run a hospitality venue. And where it has been a much simpler operation and team to run without that cellar door and bar and so on. So one little thing I'm a bit hesitant about is we've got to reopen the cellar door because it's a key part of the town destination. At the end of the day, it's $500,000 of additional revenue at very high margins. A lot of tourists will pick up a 100 ml bottle for sort of $70 to put on their in their airline baggage and go home with. So it's a great channel, but gosh, it just creates a lot more labour units, a lot more hours. And it does take your focus away from sort of, in some ways anyway, from higher value brand penetration and brand development and adding value to your brand in higher value markets than in that cellar door town. But as we all know, like Starwood and Lark and, lime burners in Western Australia, there is an inherent value in telling your own story on your own property. So I think that's what will make it very worthwhile doing, that people can actually come and see the provenance and the reality of our production and our passionate people and what they're doing, on the tools, on the day, on the job. So, yeah. So, but I hope that answers the question. Other than the only thing in COVID. That's the only thing COVID. It's been interesting to me how much simpler our business has become without having to run a cellar door and bar. So, yeah.
Yeah, right. That is interesting.
You find with smaller distilleries too, that whole telling the story and that cellar door experience is absolutely crucial to the business and building the brand, isn't it? It's you can't take it for granted. That's for sure. That's my understanding anyway, talking to different people and our own experience. Yeah.
No, it's too good an opportunity. But then I know that Michael, who's in charge of a lot of things with both production and distilling and maturation management and everything, he will get pulled away by every other visitor into the distillery. Will want to chew his ear off and have slug a dram with him, and so he'll be cursing it. But anyway, I think we can manage it. I still think the upside. I think the benefits outweigh the negatives.
And what's the whole distilling scene like in NZ? I mean, it's one of the few places on the planet where home distilling is legal, and it makes you think that there would be quite a push, home distillers moving in and as a brewery sets up, a distillery sets up. Is that what's happening in NZ, or is it fairly still early in the piece?
So in New Zealand, it's interesting. You don't even have to get a license to run a distillery. So there is no legal process or customs bonded to actually run a still. Obviously, to store whiskey, to consume whiskey, all of those things have, more regulations around them. But And in fact, their interpretation of the world's the ISO 9000, whatever all the guidelines, best practice are of on the storage of flammable goods and fire separations and fire cells. I mean, it is onerous in New Zealand. I mean, I had our distillers over in Sydney for Whisky Live, and we went to Hickson House, and we went to Archie Rose, and we went to Manly, and they just could not believe that the common sense prevails over here in the distilling. You can have barrels in the same room as your distillery. Well, in Scotland you can't do that anymore, and certainly here in New Zealand, that is impossible to get approved. So become very onerous, and in fact the guidelines, regulations in New Zealand are really messy and muddy at the moment while they try and overhaul. So as an industry lobby group, they are trying to engage with government to try and just get some practicality around it rather than theoretical incredibly expensive impositions on producers. So but it is interesting that in New Zealand anyone can build a still and start running it.
And so we've heard from New Zealanders in the past that you don't believe that impacts the actual commercial distillery industry, because those home distillers are happy just being home distillers, making their own stuff for themselves and their friends and leaving it at that. They don't have the aspiration of going mainstream with their product.
I think I dropped out there. Sorry, Luke, if I didn't catch the end of that question.
So yeah, we've heard from New Zealanders before that they're not concerned, or that the home distillers aren't really interested in moving up into the commercial space. They're happy just distilling their own thing for their own consumption and for their friends and family, and just leaving it at that. Is that your sort of take on the home distiller mentality, or do you think there are more and more who are wanting to go mainstream?
I think it's a legacy of not a lot of people know that a lot of New Zealand, like America, during the temperance movement in the 1920s, a lot of people went for prohibition. So what I understand is, as part of the trade-off of prohibition was, while the commercial production and sale of spirits was banned, and beer and a lot of other things in a lot of regional areas, and still today in New Zealand there's a lot of government control boards that distribute liquor. So down in Invercargill and Southland, and Oamaru and North Otago is one of the more recent ones to go to a more liberal distribution model, and I'm pretty sure there's some on the North Island over on the east coast. So I believe, what I understand is that as part of prohibition, the trade-off was to really loosen up the domestic production and consumption of spirits. Even though, if you look at it, they're banning it, for any trade, but then they appeared to turn a blind eye to people making it and drinking it at home. So yeah.
So it's obviously someone in government is a home distiller and is happy just to let it be.
Go, Jacinta.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably because I don't believe there's a big moonshining trade, outside maybe a few pockets. So, it's just not, if the police have got to spend time doing things, that's probably not their greatest fascination or focus, is going to be a bunch of home distillers. So, I'm not, that I can't.
No, we've lost him.
Knowing one or two cops myself, they're a little partial to the old whiskey themselves. So
yeah, right. So they're happy to just sort of turn a blind eye, and if a bottle of whiskey happens to land in their hand, then so be it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the way it's always worked, Luke.
Yeah, absolutely. The booze economy. I love it. Can I just say as well, just before we move on, so I've polished off the Hobart Winterfest 2022. Absolute fucking cracker.
Well, that's not fair. Should be saving these things.
I've still got the Waterford.
Okay.
Waterford.
Good.
And then the Highwayman, batch 3. That is good stuff, but oh my God, it's a kick in the throat.
It's a big one.
It is huge. But it's only 53.9 only. But there you go. Interesting. The Hobart's 55. So, but that one was smooth and jammy and lovely. But yeah, the Fires and Floods, there is fire in that fucker. Absolutely. Wow.
That's a good name for a release. That's fire in that fucker.
Yeah.
You keeping notes there?
So when you're overseas and you're promoting New Zealand whiskey and what you're doing, and I imagine you get hit with a general question: what is New Zealand whiskey? What makes it different? What makes it stand out? How do you? Because it's not a provincial thing or anything like that. But how do you reply to people like that when you talk about New Zealand whiskey?
I like that we can sort of say that as a New World whiskey nation, like New Zealand got really big commercial distilling going again in 1965 in Dunedin, and and it's run right through since then. So, a really big distillery was bought. Seagram's a major international player, owned that distillery for nearly a couple of decades. Then Foster's a really big international player, bought that distillery and ran it for several years before they decided to break it up and send all those stills and everything to Fiji to make rum. But they had 30,000 200-litre barrels sitting in the old Dunedin Airport hangars. So that was a serious volume of whiskey that Seagram's and then Foster's had laid down. It was one of the biggest stocks of single malt whiskey in the world outside of Scotland that actually met the provenance of single malt whiskey. So it's got a lot of heritage in terms of stylistically crafty. I don't feel that there's because it has evolved over various owners, and they started peating whiskey and bringing that in the late 80s, and so I wouldn't say there's anything distinctly that's not found in Scotland somewhere or in Tasmania somewhere in the actual distilling. But obviously our people have got different experiences and different perceptions of the kind of and the style of whiskey they're making. But I think what we're really focusing on, as in our company, is we are only using New Zealand barleys. We're now building relationships with farms and with the malting company Gladfield so that we can get those, like literally, grain to glass, all those nice little buzzwords. And again, we're not the first people to do that, but we're really focused on using New Zealand wine barrels, French oak New Zealand wine barrels for maturation. Maybe not for all of our whiskies. I mean, our South Island single malt, we've always very much focused that on being a bourbon, American oak, ex-bourbon cask matured whiskey, a very classic style, very Speyside like flavor profile, quite floral, quite light, quite elegant, very prominent caramel and honey and vanilla from that bourbon barrel. But not as complex as our whiskies that we finish in the French oak New Zealand red wine barrels, where you've got that spiciness, you've got that pepperiness from the French oak, and you've just got that completely different. And it's a bit like Starwood, as in we're not just finishing them in red wine barrels. We always make sure that our double wood and now our double cask have had more time in red wine barrel than they've had in the bourbon barrel, so that it's not just a polishing it up with a 6 months at the end in a wine cask for a little bit of colour and maybe a little bit of flavour. It's actually its prominent influence has been its red wine barrel time. So, and I think New Zealand red wines, do give a different provenance to, using Tassie red wines. I mean, it irritates us that we have to send New Zealand wine casks all the way to Tassie or all the way to South Australia to get recoopered and cut down and shaved and charred, because there is not a single cooperage in New Zealand, which is just blows my mind.
Oh, wow.
And we are looking forward to setting one up. But all those things, I hope, can to whiskey that we know is world class. It's had a great market globally and it's had great accolades globally. But it's always such a tricky question, Crafty. What what is different about New Zealand whiskey? There's as much diversity within the New Zealand distillers, just like there are in Tasmania and in mainland Australia, to actually try and really grab one flavour profile or one production style that defines New Zealand whiskey, profoundly. I hope that makes some sense.
Yeah. No, totally agree. I mean, one of the things that I talk about from an Australian whiskey standpoint, if people ask at a market or a cellar door or something, go, what is a uniquely Australian whiskey? It's a really hard question because there is no unique Australian style of whiskey. I mean, each distillery is doing different things. There are different techniques and different barley and different barrels, and so you're not going to get those areas of provenance like you do in Scotland, which is now mainly driven by marketing of lowlands, highlands, Speyside, that sort of thing. It's a uniqueness with each distillery and what they're doing and their approach to making whiskey, isn't it? Very much so.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the excitement and sort of industrious innovation of a new, young, energetic, innovative industry. I've got to say, in Scotland, if you took away a lot of the outliers, like the small distillers, the new startups, if you look at probably 85% of Scottish whiskey, there is a sort of a sameness or a narrowness to the flavour profile that is really only influenced at one end of the spectrum by peat. I mean, you can look at Glendronach and Glenfarclas and look at sherry barrels and all these other influences in the barrels, but I would actually say that from a liquid point of view, you've got peated, there's a scale of how much peat's in them, and then you've got a lot of whiskies which I believe the general consumer really isn't going to pick a hell of a lot of difference between any of the Speyside whiskies if they've all been matured in bourbon barrels. So what I'm saying is I feel that unless you're a really discerning whiskey drinker, there is a sameness to Scotch whiskey, which might be a good thing because there is they're developing a brand, they're developing a DNA that has a consistency across it. Whereas Tasmania, there is so much diversity. Probably the main thing that unites Tasmania is so many of them historically have used small casks. So small casks, I feel, do bring a certain style and a flavour profile and a texture. And in New Zealand, it's a bit everywhere. Like Cardrona are almost exclusively maturing in big, 200-litre barrels. We're doing 20s and 60s and 100s and 200s. And I believe that the new big distillery up at Pocono, south of Auckland, they're doing a mix of casks as well. So it'll just be interesting to see where New Zealand settles out, whether we end up having a sameness where we can build a distinctive flavour expectation like I feel Scotland has. And I think Japanese whiskey actually has a bit of that too, or whether we end up as diverse as Tasmania and Australia. And I kind of hope we do end up diverse because you don't want all the whiskies to taste too similar.
No,
variety.
You want some diversity. Absolutely.
I mean, we've got everything. Yeah, that's it. We've got everything from the red gum cask to absolute smoky bonfires of things, all the way out to your unpeated, gentle expressions. It's a beautiful mix of something for everyone.
And I mean, I've become very interested recently in the difference between, third and fourth fill barrels, ex-bourbon, where it's very spirit forward versus, Tasmanian influence style where I just love port barrel matured, sherry barrel matured, red wine. And now I've discovered Wolfburn and some of the old Mortlicks and, which really focus on using tight old barrels. And the colour of them's like water with just a hint of yellow, where they're saying we want our spirit to be all about the cereal and the yeast and the ferment, and we don't want the barrel to do anything other than soften and, let some of the volatiles blow off. And we don't want the barrel to dominate the distillate. And I'm interested in that, like that. And this is only something I've got interested in probably since we started building our own distillery. So I don't know what you think about that, Crafty, what you aim for, but it's pretty low-hanging fruit to say, let's make a spirit that is so good that it's great as new make, but B, it hardly needs a barrel flavour profile. It just needs time in barrel to soften, and get a bit more texture and viscosity. So yeah, I'm loving Wolfburn at the moment. They only use tight old barrels. They don't want a barrel that is barrel forward. They want spirit forward whiskey. You got one there? Look,
I've got one. I've got one. Which one have you got? I've got the lightly peated Morven. I think that's how you pronounce it. Morven, yeah, lightly peated Morven. And
that's
Wolfburn. It's Wolfburn, yeah. I don't even know where I got that from, but I have it. And it's got dust on it. I haven't touched it in quite
it's
a
got a
while.
bit of dust on it. You haven't opened that one too often.
No, it's been sitting
open
on
it.
the
See what you think.
Pour a dram, Luke.
I will.
It's a good comment, Greg, because there are different schools of thought on that. I mean, the traditional marketing is 80% of your flavour comes from the barrel, and the further you go down the manufacturing process of making whiskey, the least impact it has on the overall flavour.
Good colour.
Barley's.
It is. It is like water. Look at that. Very clear.
But yeah, the
And
other
a real fruitiness to it as well. It's gorgeous.
Yeah, the other school of thought is, as you said, is you want the raw material to speak. You don't want the cask to dominate because, well, what's the point using high quality barley and have a really good brew and good yeast profile and all that if you just want
all the hassle that goes into making that really good brew.
Yeah. So more and more,
and if there's no doubt the green bottle masked the fact that they were really pale. They weren't even straw. They were water with a hint of yellow liquids, and they were delicious. They were powerful. They were flavoursome. And it's interesting. I mean, I wouldn't even be surprised if a lot of those whiskies have caramel, non-flavour caramel, which is completely legit and very, very common across Scotland, obviously, just to try and add the look of flavour because, in fact, people look at a pale, watery whiskey and they presume it's going to be flavourless, whereas, we're hopefully all wise enough to know that sometimes those whiskies are the absolute knockout mouth kicks because you're sort of not expecting this big fruit bomb in your mouth or this big kick of peat because it just looks so flavourless. I mean, I've got a Clontarf whiskey here. Can you guys see this? This is Clontarf, an Irish whiskey. That's got no colour in it, and that is actually a really nice single malt. It's a proper single malt from Ireland. I'll crack it now. I used to have 3 of them. I've only got one left. It's about 15 years old. But yeah, full of flavour. Triple distilled, of course.
If only you could share it.
That would be lovely. Well, I actually haven't cracked that Wolfburn for I don't know how long. A couple of years maybe. It's been sitting there, and I think that's going to disappear very quickly.
Stick it back up on the shelf where you found it and leave it there.
It's too dark over there. It can sit on my desk for a little while.
Mind you, Luke, if your whiskey before was a big, powerful whiskey and you had that after, you probably wouldn't taste it, would you?
Well, that's the thing. I can taste. Oh yeah, the Highwayman was just brutally big, and yes, I can still feel it in my throat. But the Wolfburn, the fruitiness comes through so easily that it's so light on the nose. It's very sort of stone, like fresh stone fruits, not your jammy stone fruits. It's very fresh, vibrant stone fruits, and just lovely jubbly. I think I'll finish that one.
Sort of peaches and apricots, Luke.
Yeah, peaches, apricots, a little bit of citrus.
Nice.
And yeah, just very, very light, very, very nice summer whiskey, I would say.
Nice.
So for me, I sort of look at the color of a whiskey and go, well, there's not much color there. That's going to be a good summer one. It'll be fresh. It'll be vibrant. Whereas if I look at something like that, I go, yeah, that's a winter warmer.
A bit of a stew.
That's a big one.
So
what's exciting you about what's happening in Australia, Greg? From the industry standpoint, I mean, you're in the spiritual homeland of Australian whiskey, and it's a very, very vibrant place, as you said. What's exciting you about what's going on right now?
I really like to see all the different Tassie distilleries that are doing completely new takes on very ancient, Scottish traditions. So you might know Loreni have built this massive drum malting machine. Like it's huge. It's the size of a semi-trailer truck, like a big milk tanker, and it's no one's done that before. It's literally a big commercial industrial version of Peter Bignell's commercial clothes drying malt machine. So that's interesting, and they've got Peter Bailey to build it, and obviously Peter's been a huge figure in the Tasmanian steelmaking industry, or Australian steelmaking. I love about the Tassie red gum smoked whiskey, and even some of the the mainland people that are using red gum and bark for malting. I mean, that just makes sense. Why would we use peat except in Tassie and unless you've got natural peat around you. I don't know if any of you guys have had John Wilstra's Coralline Distillery seaweed smoked whiskey. I mean, why aren't people with the maritime distilleries, burning seaweed to malt their barley? I mean, that's a fantastic flavour profile. It's incredibly salty but effervescent and sweet. And I said to John, John, I think this is a world first. I think there now has been an example. Someone in Canada was doing it as well, but I'm like, I have never heard it such an obvious thing to do, to smoke whiskey burning seaweed. That's awesome. So those kind of things, and basically what I like is where we're trying to break out of making Scotch. Like, why? It doesn't make a lot of sense to me why people were bringing in peated Scotch barley. Like, if you're trying to make a Tassie whiskey or a New Zealand whiskey, that to me it just seems a bit incongruent with the idea when you've actually you've got great barley farmers and malting companies, locally. So there's a lot going on in Tassie and Australian whiskey. I think Morris or Rutherglen, getting our price points down, getting our whiskey a bit more affordable, and what Star would have done, that needs to happen. We need to see it not just as a bespoke artisanal thing, which is awesome what you're doing, Crafty, and all the different styles and nuances and single cask, batch by batch. But we also, I think, just need some really world-class $80 and $90 whiskies in the market, and that's happening now. So, yeah, I think there's a heap going on, and it's also interesting the number of internationals now coming to work in Australia in the whiskey world, because they see something going on here that is quite pioneering and innovative. So, whereas, in Japan, there's probably only been 4 or 5 startup distilleries in the last 20 years. All the big Japanese, whiskies have all been distilleries since the 1920s. So there hasn't been the same endemic, innovation and small, nimble, agile little companies that's only started to happen recently. So I think we are still benefiting from that. And that's the difference between Australia, where it's still very, I think, backyard, artisanal, not a lot of corporate. Whereas in New Zealand, I've got to say, we're the small end of the balance sheet. There's Cardrona's a really big capitalised company. The new big distillery outside Auckland that's owned by Talabardine and a French cognac company, that's got seriously, big millions of dollars behind it. The boys that have got Scapegrace Gin, they're building a really big distillery in Cromwell. They're saying that's going to be the biggest whiskey producer in New Zealand. So in some ways, whereas Australia's got whatever it is, 350 distilleries, and probably only 5 or 10 of them are big corporate players. In New Zealand, there's only making whiskey. There's only around, say, 20, maybe 25 distillers making whiskey, but the biggest end of that are actually big, heavily capitalised companies with a big corporate ambitions of making high volume, more affordable whiskey from day one. So there's just a different composition of the industry from day one, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. Does that also mean that, with the high level of capitalisation that's going on, they're building operations which are going to be very much targeted on export and riding on the back of New Zealand and the brand New Zealand out there on the international market?
Yeah, I think so. Like Matt Johns with the Pocono Distillery, he's already got Tullibardine with, huge distribution networks across America and Europe and Asia, I presume. I don't know very well, but and Scapegrace. We have always developed our product as well. Like, we just gave everything a whole geographic sense of place of New Zealandness, because New Zealand doesn't have a Dan Murphy's where you can get an account and get into 300 stores. The biggest, as you know, Crafty, is Glengarry across Auckland. It's sort of got 16 or 17 stores. Every other liquor retailer, you have to sell, hand sell almost store by store and ship it independently, individually, and invoice. So you're doing a lot of admin. Whereas the beauty of Dan Murphy's is, you got one relationship, one monthly invoice, one central, distribution center, and bang, you're hitting all of Australia with one sort of relationship. So, yeah, I think a lot of those New Zealand companies have looked at the New Zealand domestic market and said it's very fragmented, it's very hard. But what we do know is the New Zealand brand is very sought after, and it sells very easily in America, in Hong Kong, in London, and in Frankfurt. So, yeah, I think they'll all be very export focused like we are.
And what sort of volume are you actually putting out and exporting at the moment?
So last year we laid down just over 40,000 litres. So, that's not massive. Like, we have more capacity than that, but we're just, until everything's out of COVID and we've got our duty-free markets back, it's not like we're rolling in cash, for the next few years until that whiskey's ready for market. So we exported from New Zealand last year, and we sort of look at Dan Murphy's not as an export market. It's like part of our broader Australasian domestic market. But if I included Dan Murphy's, I always talk in bottles, which I know we're not big enough to talk in cases yet. But yeah, we sold like 34,000 bottles, internationally last year outside of New Zealand. So that's a mix of, you got to remember, our bottle sizes are 350 mils, 375 and 500 mil bottles. So, that's where we're at with our export sales. And New Zealand is a
that's a lot of bottles.
It is a lot of bottles.
Don't sell yourself short there. That's a lot of fucking bottles.
Sorry, I missed that.
I said, don't sell yourself short. It's a lot of bottles.
Yeah, but the big boys talk about 30,000 cases, so I don't want to,
whatever. This isn't about the big boys, so this is about.
So just to put it back in context, how many bottles have we sold, Crafty, a year?
Fuck no, a lot.
Not 40,000 though, have we? I wish we were selling 40,000.
we would be in a bigger shed.
I was telling the boys, though, Crafty, I sent those photos, Crafty, to you from Hickson House, because they had five or four of your releases, a couple I hadn't tried before. So they were both like $48 a slug. So if they can get that, like, it was just obscene, the prices per dram of whiskey.
We're getting that price for our whiskey.
Good on them, and good on you. Good on you for getting it. It's fantastic. It's great. I mean, that's the great thing. And they knew the story, like the little French guy or Bolivian guy in there who, with an accent, is a lovely fella, and he knew your story. He knew more about you than your wife does.
We definitely play at the small end of town. No question of that. Yeah. Yeah, actually, I bottled. It was actually a couple of individual bottles just for a special thing for them, and yeah, you got to try them. By the sounds of it, I saw those photos. I thought, wow. Unless you knew the story behind them, they just sit on the shelf as what is that? So yeah, no, it's good.
No, they were good.
Yeah.
And Crafty, are you very upfront with everyone that you're actually a Kiwi? You're not.
I play it both ways because I've lived in Australia longer than I lived in NZ. No. People know I'm a Kiwi, and it comes out occasionally. The accent comes out. I'm pretty good at keeping it down. I can pull it out when I need to, but both ways. Keep it going both ways. But I haven't been to NZ since 2005, I think, from memory.
Wow,
it's been a while.
I've got a few collabs planned for you, Crafty. One of them on the label, it's going to have a photo of you when you fell asleep in the fireplace at Ratho Farm Highlands Resort, and that's going to be the label.
Oh,
have you got a name for it yet?
Sleeping Beauty.
Yeah, that's where
the Sleeping Beauty single barrel beast.
Beast.
There you go.
Yes, he mentioned Ratho Farm, and I stayed there. I think it was 2 nights in the end from memory. I think I stayed an extra night because I was just having such a good time. And I got to meet Greg and
in the fireplace,
whiskey and drink whiskey. Sorry, Todd?
In the fireplace, apparently. In the fireplace.
Yes.
Why were you in the fireplace?
I don't know.
The fire in the big lounge room has a big sort of pit in front of it where people sit and smoke cigars and pipes and blow their smoke up the chimney. But Crafty and I had a few whiskies, and I think I came back from outside, and he just dozed off sitting in the fire pit in front of cuddling a big fire dog. So he didn't burn though. That was good. But Ratho's actually got a really interesting bit of whiskey history because it was settled by Alexander Reid in 1820. Father of Australian golf, because he laid out Australia's first, or it actually wasn't the first golf course, but it's now the oldest continuous golf course. Anyway, his uncle wrote the first ever economic argument for the benefits of barley being distilled rather than being baked into bread, and it's called an Apology for Whiskey. It was written in 1769. And it's considered to be the very first printed reference to the word whiskey. Before that, whiskey, Ibiza, and all these Gaelic words, and whiskey was used a lot, I'm told, colloquially, but it hadn't ever been printed as a word before. It's the first known printing of the word whiskey. So that's 1769, and we've got copies of that. I better send you all up one because it's a fascinating, very tongue-in-cheek piss take on why brewers and bakers did not know what to do with barley, whereas distillers knew how to exact the best use of, the best economic outcome of, and the best community building gain, which was distilling the barley, and give the wheat and the oats and the corn to the brewers and the bakers, and leave the barley fuck alone for the distillers. So.
Well, I've just put. Feel free. I'll take a copy. That'll be awesome. I've just put a link to it on Amazon. If only I thought of setting up affiliate links, maybe I'd make some money. But I've just put a link into the chat. So anybody who is interested in getting an apology for whiskey, there you go. It's $38, just over $38 for a hardcover, $30 for a paperback. What a bargain!
There you go.
Where's that link, mate? I can't see that on my screen. Where do I find that?
I will. So up in there's a comments section over on the right.
Here it is. No, I've
you're
got
on
it
the
here.
phone.
Here we go, chat.
Yep, there you go.
Yes, there it is. Well done. Well done.
I'm sure it'll be on
I like
Audible, and if you sign up to Audible, you get it for free for your first month.
Audible are not a sponsor, Todd. They're not a sponsor.
It was Amazon.
Yeah,
Neither is
Audible.
Amazon, but there you go.
Hit us up. You can sponsor. Speaking of,
We're not Mr. Beast.
we've not missed a beat. We really should just have a little chat. Oh, he's gone. We lost him.
He
He'll
has
come
gone,
back.
but hopefully he'll come
He'll come
back.
back.
But
We'll use this time to have a quick chat about our sponsors. Now, I've been really slack, unfortunately.
Sorry,
I don't know
sponsors.
how it happened, but I forgot to load our last 2 episodes up on the website. My bad. So
Right.
now we have the Barrel Brokers episode with Robbie, which was a month ago. That is now up on the website, which will go through to iTunes and Spotify and all, Amazon and all the places where podcasts go. So yeah, check out that episode, and also if you need a barrel, have a chat to Robbie. Happy birthday, Youngie!
Happy birthday, Youngie.
Yeah, happy birthday, Youngie. Yep. And I was going to say Barrel Brokers. I picked up a couple of PX Sherry casks the other week from Robbie. So they're good barrels.
Hope they're full.
Hold on.
No,
What are you showing us? Ooh. That's a beautiful color. Look at that.
Yeah, it is.
We
Look at that.
we need to get one of those bottles for sort of like
Because
We'll find. Crafty, you've cracked a lot of these, haven't you, Crafty?
I haven't cracked that one. I don't think, no.
Peruvian, no. We haven't had a lot of that.
Oh, okay. I'll have to. Well,
crack a bottle.
if I get Crafty one, I'm up in Sydney next month, so we'll have to catch up, guys.
Please
Yeah,
do.
yeah,
Let us know when you're up
absolutely.
here.
Yep, let us know. Absolutely.
Right.
I will
Yeah.
zip back into our sponsors, though, seeing as they actually paid us money to get a mention.
Let's
So,
see
yes.
if they do it this financial year.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, we better check that out. Shit. So, yes, Barrel Brokers, have a chat with Robbie. If you need a barrel, he'll find whatever it is that you want or need. Specialty barrels, those weird
Has some
unicorn
really
things.
good barrels.
He can find it all. I'm going to jump over to Wine Oak Cooperage. Youngie, happy birthday, mate. Hope you've had a good one. You should be watching us. I don't know what you're doing that's more important. So,
Right. You don't
All
look a day over 72.
that's better than what I said at the beginning, which was like 80 or something. Then we've got staying on the wood side of things. We've got Transwood, Master Coopers. Absolutely. If you're in Tassie, they're your closest Cooper, I believe. Who do you get your barrel through?
Hey, give it a go.
Yeah. Greg, who do you get your
So
barrel
David
done
Schmieder is an absolute gentleman and a real genius craftsman. So I can actually vouch for him. There you go.
Very good.
I actually
then we
just got a delivery of barrels this week, actually. I've got an Amaro, which I wanted recoopered, bourbon, and 2 rum casks. So, yeah, they're going to be filled. And I've got some Youngies, which I'm going to be filling as well soon. So,
Good.
yeah, so there's three barrel suppliers there on our sponsors. A bit of a theme.
Yeah.
I
And
love hearing
that's
barrels
most
are
of
being
it in the
filled.
country. I think we've got a monopoly on barrel sponsors.
Yeah, but they're all really good sponsors, and very
They
good.
are
barrels.
really good sponsors, and they're just lovely people as well, and they know
I
their
know.
shit. What these guys don't know about wood isn't worth knowing.
Yeah.
That's
How
my
much
2
wood-
cents.
wood chuck chuck?
That was good the first time you said it, Luke. About the 20th, it's a bit the same.
Oh, whatever. That's what the
Okay.
spiel is. Burnsy.
Good for CCL.
Oh, CCL labels, yes. That's
Yep.
where Crafty gets all his labels from.
Great labels.
Quality.
Quality.
Saber glass. Also, where Crafty gets his glass from.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
many others. Many other
And many
Australian.
Many others. Absolutely. Burnsy with your still making. He's still got a long wait time though, doesn't he?
Yeah, every time he does a post, you see so many stills on the build. It just shows you how dynamic the industry is right now.
Yeah. And that's not just newcomers to the industry. That is all the existing distillers as well, just wanting more.
Scaling up, yeah.
They
Have you
make
got
it really good still.
Have you got your new still yet, Crafty?
No, not yet. It's just in storage right now.
Aha.
Bugger.
Soon.
Soon, yeah.
Bugger.
And
Something
Wild
new.
Logan.
Good water.
Fantastic water.
It would be the best water in New South Wales, certainly.
It's the only water that Craftworks uses.
Which
You
is,
think
I
there's
mean,
a theme here that I know all these people?
Hey,
well, you also know almost every guest we've had. So we're slowly working through your phone contacts list.
the little black book, so to speak.
Yeah. Absolutely. Seeing as you do know absolutely everyone. But thank you very much to our sponsors. We will be hitting you up again soon for more money. So
And
thank you for that.
please sponsor us again for another year. That would be just fantastic.
It would be really
We
nice.
promise to try harder next year or this year.
Mm,
Maybe not. No, we
mm,
will. We will try harder.
yeah. We always strive for better. Yeah. Just not in our production quality. Anyway, back to the show.
Back to the show.
So
So you're
what's your
traveling
go-to
overseas?
whiskey?
Go to one of the questions here.
Oh, hold on.
Hang on, let me just ask my question, Greg. Are you traveling overseas yet, or are you apart from NZ? Are you getting around? Yeah.
Yep. We're going to New Zealand next week. I snuck in 2 trips last year actually, while the Tasmania to New Zealand travel bubble was in existence for about 8 weeks. So I got in 2 trips then, and then heading over. Got the Whisky Show Melbourne, then an overnight flight to Auckland, and then a week over there, and then our sales and marketing manager she's in Finland at the moment, but then doing all of our sort of roadshow with our Dutch and our German and our French and our British distributors. And then I'll look forward to going over to Philadelphia and Chicago to reactivate our sales channels over there. The COVID actually, because we just found that our half bottles weren't really connecting with the market over there, so we're able to relaunch that now with 700 mils, 750s, obviously.
750. Yeah, right.
Were you at Whisky Live Sydney?
Yeah, I'm disappointed I didn't see it. We were over opposite Manly Spirits.
How did we miss
seriously?
you?
No,
We were next to-
we got overwhelmed by the sheer number of places to see.
And the amount of whiskey
We,
that we drank by the time we got to
So
that end of the room.
we had Lark next to us, and then the rare and collectible bar next to us, and then opposite us was Manly Spirits Company. So I'm sorry we missed you.
How do we do that? Yeah,
I don't know.
how we missed that.
I don't think many people missed us because we sold out of every product at the shop except for one. It was a really good show.
Oh, look, Todd and I thoroughly enjoyed ourselves. We were
I was not allowed
pretty
to go
happy
out
by the end of it. I had to. I got home from that. I got home from that and had to put up an outdoor heater on my roof, and I could barely stand. I had that good a time.
Yeah, there's a lot of very generous pourers at those whiskey shows. It's such great value for money for the people that go along. It's great value, and it's great value for the brands too.
No, it was good. Now we've got a question come in from Dave Taylor.
We'll have to set up the Cape Whisky Convention. That'll be a money spinner for you, Crafty.
I'm in. I'll come. So what's your oldest whiskey in a barrel?
So our oldest is 30-year-old whiskey. We've got 4 barrels of that left, but they're actually not in barrel anymore. They're all distilled in 87. And we took them out in 2017 because just angel share, and we didn't feel that they were getting any better in their flavour profile. So our oldest is 30 years, and that's Dan's about to do another order of that. It's $499 for a half bottle, so it's pretty expensive juice, but sought after by people that want a birthday present or discerning drinkers who just want to taste it's only the 3rd country in the world to have a 30-year-old single malt.
Yeah,
So,
wow. That's an achievement.
And you mentioned
it's good
angel
juice too.
So
those barrels, they were all 190 litre ex Kentucky bourbon barrels from Four Roses Distillery, and so they were all filled at 60% on the knocker back in 87. They hadn't really started peating at that stage. They started peating in 88 and only probably got good at it by 1990, 91. And anyway, so they were filled probably to around 180 litres or even more, 185. But, yeah, they've come right back to sort of 80 or 90 litres. But their ABV's held up. Most of them are in the mid-50s still. So I'm going to have to go and blow my nose, guys. Excuse me.
That's right. Four Roses as a bourbon, and I'm not a bourbon drinker. But I remember Whiskey Live, last Whiskey Live I went to, where Todd was my stand-in dad because he couldn't make it due to COVID. Dad too. Four Roses I remember were there, and I thoroughly enjoyed.
Yeah,
thoroughly enjoyed the Four Roses. It was an absolute standout bourbon. And yeah, that being said, as someone who just does not like the sweetness of a bourbon, so yeah, that'd be an absolute cracker.
Yeah, and for some reason I don't know exactly why, but the New Zealand bourbon market is much bigger than, say, this, not in volume, but as a percentage of the overall whiskey scene, bourbon is bigger in New Zealand than in Australia. So when Seagram's bought this big distillery down in Dunedin, one of the reasons was they were able to bring in their bourbons, their American bourbons, their Canadian Club, all of their sort of North American whiskies into New Zealand in barrel, decant it and bottle it and label it and then sell it into the Australian market. And that, because it was being manufactured in New Zealand, they broke the trade barriers for the Australian market, and they were able to get all these brands right around New Zealand and Australia without paying the excises. So Seagram sort of, and what that meant was they had all these fresh, wet Four Roses and Canadian rye barrels and so on, and basically they just put their new make spirits straight into them. They didn't shave them, they didn't char them, and that's an interesting case study in itself, that they had such long matured single malt and blended whiskey in unreconditioned casks. So that's sort of actually one of the reasons why Seagram's bought and ran that distillery for so long, which not everyone's particularly interested in, but I am from a geopolitical history sense.
Yeah, and it's interesting the loophole that they found there to get around the excise.
Oh, it was just that Australia and New Zealand were in the same trade block. So if it was manufactured in New Zealand, you didn't pay Australian tariffs, and that was enough manufacturing. Was if you decanted and reduced it and filled a bottle and labelled it and packaged it, someone signed off that was a New Zealand produced product. Just like cars, a lot of the cars were being sent unassembled, and then they were just assembled in Auckland or assembled in Australia and
Wow.
That gives you
backdoor
something.
spirits is what you call that.
Yeah. That's that whoever figured that out the first time must have made an absolute mozza to figure that out, make it happen, and go, yeah, I've got this now. We're gonna roll this out for everything. Smart people, God, I hate them.
But not tell
It's
anyone
like
else.
it's like when we bring in for our single cask club in New Zealand, when we bring in our journeyman liquid. So we've got a sister distillery in Chicago. And so when we bring in their barrels, we have to do a level of manufacture in New Zealand. Otherwise, it is full excise payable. So they don't have the same kind of Queen's Customs bonded warehouse structure that Australia has, where you can bring stuff in under bond and sit it. In New Zealand, if it comes in under bond, you still have to pay your import, your excise, unless there is a level of manufacture. And a level of manufacture is deemed, as long as there's one label to put on, then it's not completed. So it can't be a box, but we always get all of our independent bottling bottles for our whiskey clubs sent over with one label that we have to apply, and then suddenly we are able to bring it in and put it in our bond store without paying excise until we sell it. So it's bizarre and inconsistent, all of those international trade regulations. Like when we bring whiskey over from New Zealand in bulk to Australia, like 1,000 litres of new make, if we're selling it to an independent bottler, they will charge excise on it unless a level of manufacture is put on that. So even pouring 10 mil of water into 1,000 litres of 62% alcohol is considered a level of manufacture. And then they tick the box that, that's you don't have to pay excise. It's just an absolute nonsense. But you gotta jump through hoops and play the game.
Yeah, wow. It's all about knowing those hoops, though. Knowing which ones you can jump through. Wow.
You make sure you educate yourself pretty quickly when you get told by customs that you got a $14,000 bill that you weren't expecting to bring stuff into your bond store, and you learn all of those variations in the international customs culture pretty quickly. So yeah.
Wow.
Fair enough.
That just boggles my mind how the differences in law, the difference in just such a small thing can actually make such a huge difference to the end cost.
Yeah.
And the profit or loss that you're going to make on that.
So one thing, can I start interviewing you guys now?
Yeah, sure, go for it.
So Todd, how did you meet Crafty?
Well, so my wife and Crafty worked together something like 20 odd years ago, maybe a bit longer. And then they went in separate ways. And then about 5 years ago, my wife and Crafty met up again at a Christmas party. And at that stage, I was starting to think about doing some distilling in my garage. Fully legit, as you know.
Of course.
Yep.
And Crafty said to Kathy that he was about to set up a distillery. So it sort of went from there a little bit, and then we went out and visited him, and made the reconnection, and we've been annoying each other ever since.
Yeah, Todd's been there pretty well from the start. So I remember the first cask when it hit 2 years, and we tasted it and we went, "Whew, okay, it's tasting like whiskey. That's good. That's a relief." We played around with the mash bill right at the start. So so the Todd is my right-hand man, and we pretty transparent, knows the ins and outs of it, and keeps me on the short and narrow when I sometimes go, "Let's go out that direction," and we go, "Or maybe not."
Well, I try to, but then sometimes we both go out on that direction.
Yeah.
And that's where the wives come in.
And Luke, do you reckon Crafty is a good teacher? Is Crafty a good teacher of the Todd?
Oh, look, Todd's first release, Time and Wages, is an absolute. It's a brilliant first release. Have you had a chance to give that one a try?
No. So is Todd? Have you got your own distinct bottlings separate to Crafty's?
No,
so it's under the Craftworks brand.
I get paid in whiskey. Our inside joke is that I get paid in whiskey, and that was my first payment.
So Todd selected the cask. Todd did the cuts on the still, and we bottled it. And it's called Time and Wages Bumblebee because it was his time and it's his wages, and it was a honey seasoned PX cask. And it was.
And since we're both Kiwis, we both had a buzzy bee when we were kids. So the bumblebee was sort of our thing.
Oh, which part of NZ are you from, Todd?
Rotorua originally.
Nice. I'm sorry I wasn't aware of that. That's great.
As with
I try not to hold it against
here longer than I've lived in New Zealand. So I'm probably more Australian than I am Kiwi now.
You've still got a little bit of an accent, though.
Shh, quiet. I've been working for 30 years to get rid of that.
I'm looking forward to that collab even more now that I know that you're both Kiwi distillers. That's even better. I sort of get half forgiven in New Zealand because I'm Tasmanian. They sort of see Tasmanians not as Australians, and we're probably, we have the piss taken out of us as much as Kiwis. We're sort of the arse end of Australia, and so they're far less threatened by us Tasmanians and much more embracing of us having our fingers in the New Zealand whiskey pie. So,
so to speak.
Can't wait to get you two onto a collab.
That'll be good.
It'll be good. I will be the official taste tester.
Yep. You will be, Luke. You will.
Love it. So we've almost hit the hour and a half mark, which is generally when we're done. Does anyone have any other questions that we can fire at Greg while we've got him? Just putting it out there to the audience.
Okay. Well, I guess the one question I was going to ask is are you playing with New Zealand Pete?
We aren't ourselves yet, but Michael Byers has been talking with Gladfields about that. And you probably didn't see any of the media, but the actual scientific founder of our distillery passed just before Christmas last year. And it was really great talking again with his family about, some of the projects he'd been working on, because he had actually made me aware of a really exciting series of trials that they were running in the early 80s before Seagram's took over, which I'll share with you offline, which we really want to pick up one of those in particular. So, not peat. There is a lot of New Zealand peat in like I said, 89, but more importantly, our 90, 91, 92 cask vintages. But we have not peated any of our whiskey that we have put down since starting our own distilling 7 years ago. But we will be doing interesting things soon.
So you'll be doing interesting things with what? Sheep shit?
No, I think Peter Bing owns that space. We don't need to do sheep shit.
Got a monopoly there, yeah.
Yeah, it's a fantastic whiskey, though. I'm sure you guys have had it. It is a phenomenally good whiskey. And the way Peter talks about, peat is just decomposed, broken down, wood and fibre and vegetative matter. And what's shit? It's just the sheep's body breaking down, vegetative matter. And it's just such a clever way to see sheep shit and peat are effectively much the same thing.
Except
but
only one of them has come from a sheep's asshole.
That's true. That's quite right. So, I love that whiskey. I think it's a delight.
The world's most coffee comes from an asshole of an animal.
Oh yeah, the best. Absolutely, that very expensive coffee that's like $50 a
Coffee
shot.
mark. Yeah.
Yeah. It comes from a little mammal bum.
So why can't the world's best whiskey come from the same area?
You know what?
Oh, surely it can. Surely it can, but I think it's about getting scale on it. Rather than being a novelty, it's about how to get the scale on it.
Yeah, that's right. There's a lot of sheep out there.
There's a lot of sheep in New Zealand, so
I do just want to warn you guys. I've got 1% on my phone, even though I'm plugged in. This must be chewing up. So if I drop out, it's not because Crafty upset me. It's just because I failed with my technology planning.
Okay. So on that note, then.
On that note, why don't we hit end broadcast and we will chat to you offline about all the things that you can't talk about until your battery runs out. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. You can catch it. I'm William Rule.
You missed a good one, mate.
Website, and I'm going to do it faster than I did for the last 2 episodes. I promise. I'll put it up tomorrow after I download it. So it'll be this episode will be available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and whatnot within the next 24 hours or so. Other than that, you can of course watch it back on Facebook and on YouTube. Please do like and subscribe, do all those things, and they help us get out there. And we get new followers all the time, which is awesome. So the more you like and subscribe, the more people find us. Thank you very much, Greg, for joining us. Thank you for staying.
Thanks, Greg.
No, thank you very much for having me, and we'll catch you all in Sydney.
Oh yeah,
awesome.
Please do.
Let us know when you're here, and definitely let's have a dram or 2 or 3 or 4.
Great stuff. Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Thank you all.
Hey, Greg.